Here we are. We have arrived at the threshold of separation, transformation, and reintegration. I'd like to talk about and explore what it might mean to step through the boundary of the threshold and occupy a new reality. The threshold is the borderline between transition and transformation. Some of the words and synonyms that relate to threshold are gateway, brink, edge, point, verge. You're on the verge of something. The place or point of beginning or entering. Another one, and I really think this one is truly especially meaningful at this time, a level point or value above which something is true and will take place, and below which it is not or will not. That is the threshold where those choices and those ways of being, something is true, is above the threshold, something that is not is below or behind it and needs to be left there behind. So we are there. The old ways are no longer viable for humans on the planet, for humans or the planet as well. Okay. So, and as we know, as we've seen, as we can observe daily, oppression of either humans or the planet is not good for one's soul or one's psyche, and the macro soul or psyche of a particular society as well. And those dysfunctions manifest in what we are experiencing today, the extremity of the dysfunction. So this is the turning point. We're here. There's a quote that I think is very relevant for this time, and that is, transformation means replacing old values with new ones in the evolution of conscious life. And that's by a Polish psychiatrist, Dabrowski. And Thomas Fuller in the 1700s said, there is a critical minute for all things. I want to explain and talk about liminality for a minute. Liminality is a concept, a lot of different social sciences use it, but anthropologists in particular. Liminality is a phase of an initiation ceremony. So before the initiation ceremony, you're who and what you are, maybe a child moving into puberty or adulthood. And there is this period of time then where you are going through the ceremony or the process. Let's say a young man in a Native American culture doing a vision quest. Before he went to do his vision quest, he was occupying one category, one persona in the culture. He does the vision quest. That's the liminal period. It's the between time. It's standing on the threshold. You've moved from what you were, you're going through a process, an initiation of what you will become. And so once you've gone through that initiation rite, whatever it is, then you are the new being. In this case, I would say the new society, the new way of being in the world for all of us. So that liminality is, and that's kind of can be a very rocky time. It's psychedelics are often used for that period of time in various indigenous cultures. You're confronted with fears, you're confronted with magic, you're confronted with power. So, and part of that initiation is learning how to manage those aspects of this transformation that is occurring. So I would like to talk a moment about how did we get here? How did we get to this level of oppression of other human beings? It's one manifestation of the dysfunction, a horrible one. And the disease that we're experiencing is also a manifestation of major dysfunction in global societies as well as our own. So I want to talk about the riots for a moment. And one of the things that I've wanted to say to the powers that be ever since all of this came down was, what did you think would happen? You know, what did you think would happen when you continued to behave in the way that you are behaving? Did you expect people to just lay down and take it? Which, for a while people will, and eventually they will not. So this kind of uproar about what's going on from the establishment is interesting because obviously they were not applying any kind of future thinking to what the behavior has been and how reaction would be. So one of the things I really think is happening on a deep level is that it's really hard to love and accept others if you can't do it for yourself. And when you look at the stature, the demeanor of many of the people in authority, the National Guard, the police, etc., what you see is projection, demonization, and fear. The kind of behavior we see from the police and from the authorities is fear-based. And the fear is of the other. Because if you haven't gotten to a place where you have are able to care about yourself, it's very, very difficult to care about anybody else, right? And then you project all that self-loathing onto other people as well. And it's the same with the earth, with what's happening with the environment and with the proliferation of the virus that is a result of our overcrowding and dysfunctional ways of behaving with the natural world. If you think about our foundation myth, of most of Western civilization, the banishment from the garden, man, banishment is loss of connection. It's abandonment, being abandoned. How do you deal with those feelings? Very often with having to find dominance and control. And that is also part of the founding myth of the banishment from the garden. There's also the story about it's all put here for us to manage nature in some way. So the things that supported us in the garden, we get banished from it, and then we have to figure out a way to control it. And I do believe truly that that's a basis and a metaphor for what's happening with the control of humans and the oppression of humans. So I know this is a terrifying time. It is for all of us. For us of older generations, we have experienced it before in terms of violence and riots and uprisings of oppressed people. However, it's never been conjoined with a crazy person in the White House and a pandemic. So this is, even though there's some memory for us of having experienced this before, it's also very, very different. It's a great escalation from previous outbreaks of rioting and anger and hostility when people have been oppressed to the extent that they have. So I wanted to offer some tools for this transition that I hope might be helpful for people who are feeling distraught and fearful and wondering what they can do and that type of thing. So the first tool is check your assumptions. So where and how did you learn what you think you know? For most of us, or many of us, it's simply repetition of things we were told. It's stories we were told, how we were socialized as children, the words we heard, the platitudes and the slogans we heard. So check the assumptions that you carry around with you about how the world is or how things are. That's one. The second one is the power of language. Confucius said, was one of the most powerful things I ever learned in my whole life. The beginning of wisdom is calling things by their right name. If it's murder, call it murder. If it's racism, call it that. If it's destruction, complete destruction of the environment, then call it that. And I know most of you do. There's a lot of other examples of words that are much more subtle than that. But that idea of calling things by their true name so that we don't get distracted by meanings that are leading us down a path that is not really describing reality. That's very, very important. The next tool is be a teacher. Now, that idea of using language, the power of language, is part of being a teacher. I said one time in a class, and a student actually made a bumper sticker for me, you cannot not teach. We all teach. We teach by our behavior. We teach by the language we use. We teach by how we live our lives. So be a teacher. And if that involves actually explaining things to people, then that's okay too. But it's powerful to do that, and it gives you a sense of doing something real. If it's just to one other person. So that's another one. And the next one is do what you can do. We can't all do everything, right? We can't fix this. So whatever you can do, do. If that's marching, if that's contributing to a cause, if it's, voting, there's many different things that one can do. But it gives you a feeling that you're actually able to make change and participate if you take some kind of action. If it's meditating and sending powerful energy and protective energy to the people that are protesting, there's another thing to do. There's just a variety of things, but it's do what you can is the point here, is don't feel like you're not able to do enough, because anything that we each do collectively is very powerful. Another tool is to realize that we adapt / change or die. I mean, that is adaptation. Okay. So this transition we're going through, this liminality, moving to the next phase and stage, we need to flow with that. We need to be able to do that. And I know that that's very, very difficult to do. I know that I have a lot of resistance to things that involve technology, for instance. Well, adapt or die. Learn how to move with it. And I'm using that terminology, by the way, from evolutionary theory, critters that survive and critters that don't. There are, of course, situations where you can't adapt because we're an animal, or a being can't adapt because the whole environment has disappeared that they need. But in general, if you can move on, if you can change a little bit here or there, that's adaptation. And that's the process we're going through right now. And then the last one is listen and learn from other cultures and oppressed peoples, especially those whose voices have been oppressed. It's very powerful for people in the dominant culture to just listen, to hear. That's a really meaningful thing. I keep hearing people saying also, it's kind of like my question of what did you expect would happen is, why are they so angry? Why is there so much violence? Well, gosh, listen to the reality of people's experience. The talk, as it's called, that African American parents have to give to their kids, especially their male children. about how to behave out there to be as safe as possible. I heard a very moving story on the news the other day about an African American mother who had begged her adolescent son to not wear a hoodie when he went out. This was before the riots, before all of this. Just in general life, please don't wear a hoodie in public because it makes you a target, was what she had to tell her son. I don't know whether he listened to his mom or not, but most of us don't have to give our children messages like that. So that's what I mean by listening, if possible, deeply to people. If you don't know anyone, or certainly in this time where we have to isolate, there are all kinds of books and films and things where you can have access to other people's experience and voices. We're very lucky in that respect. So I want to go over those tools just one more time, but not in detail, just to list them for you. Check your assumptions. Question where you learned what you think you know. The second one is the power of language. Think about the language you use and call things by their right name. Be a teacher in any way that you can. And do whatever you can, big or small. The next one is realize that we have to adapt to change. We won't make it if we don't adapt to change. And the last one is the one we just talked about, listening to people from other cultures, other racial and ethnic groups, people with other experiences, really listening. And I want to give you the Chinese character, break down the ideogram for listening because it's so beautiful. So the first ideogram calligraphy stroke is you, then ear, then eyes, then undivided attention, and the last one is heart. So if you can keep those in mind, that's how to listen, to hear what people are saying. And then kind of the last thing I want to talk about is understanding the power of one in many. And I want to talk about Gandhi's paradox, which has been called, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, but this is a perfect time to remember the importance of this. So Gandhi's paradox is based on what's called the myth of no effect. And that myth is an especially American myth. You know, it's all so big, it's so overwhelming, it's powerful, so powerful. I'm just one person. It's too big for us to affect any real change. In other words, that's the myth. But if you set up that concept that you individually need to change an entire system in a way, if that's the measure that, you know, the standard by which we measure ourselves, well, then that's probably not a myth. That's probably true to a certain extent. But what it does is it creates powerlessness when we think about, oh, it's too big, it's too overwhelming, I'm just one little person, you know. So can you see, on one hand, that's very true. On the other hand, it leads to powerlessness. So that's an important thing to really understand. And the other thing to remember is that we may not live to see the change. It is often takes generations for the wheel to turn completely and real change to occur. If you think about women's rights, for instance, that was 2 generations that took. The right to vote, we're still working on women's equality and women's rights. So we may not live to see the change we want to be, but we can be the inception of that change, and we may see it as well. Kind of depends on how old you are. Depends on how fast it occurs. We've got a big change that could happen coming up, you know, in November. That's really very quickly. So here's what Gandhi's paradox says. Nothing that we do as individuals matter, but it's vitally important that we do it anyway. And the reason is because think about voting, for instance. Does it matter if you don't vote individually or I don't vote individually? Of course not. Does it matter for the outcome? No. But if many, many, many individuals don't vote, then it matters. What about the protests? Does it matter if one or two or three of those people individually don't show up? No. But what if many, many, many thousands of individuals decided, it's too big for me, I can't deal with it, I'm not gonna go. I can't change the system, et cetera, all the things we just talked about that make us feel powerless. So it's the collective. The collective is made up of individuals. So that's where the paradox comes in. Nothing we do as individuals matter, but it's vitally important that we do it anyway. So the last thing that I want to say or share is try not to be afraid. And that is also difficult right now. I understand that. But if you can think maybe like an indigenous warrior, who knows, going into battle that they may not survive, but that it's a necessity to do so because that battle is crucial for the survival of the tribe and possibly at the same time to protect the earth from people who want to take it and abuse it. So having that attitude that, yes, I'm afraid, I know there are consequences, but I am going to proceed in a path of courage rather than fear is very, very powerful. This all applies to no matter how small the quote battle is. As I said, it may be simply voting. It may be sending whatever you can to help a cause. It may be how you live your life and the words you speak. All of that requires courage. So, to sum up, we are living in an amazing historical time. Terrifying, but amazing, because this transition is occurring. The wheel is turning. And it's extremely difficult. But remember that stepping through the threshold is an initiation rite. It's the heroines and heroes' journey that we're on as individuals, but the whole society and culture. I really believe the whole globe is going through this right now. We're manifesting it the most in the US because we've been one of the most dysfunctional states in the world. But we're moving through this journey. And if we can hold it that way in our minds and hearts, it will give us hope and courage. Thanks.